Hello and welcome to episode 321 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz, proud to bring you the Airbus A321 Pick Your Variety of the 321 episode of the podcast.
We really should have had them sponsor this set of episodes.
But this is the last one they get for a while. At least.
Then we'll come back around.
10
episodes.
But we have someone else with us today.
We sure do. Gabe Leigh, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much. It's good to be back. Feels like it's been a long time.
It has been a long time. You've been busy.
I have, yeah.
Well, we're all here in the same room in Stockholm.
Weird.
Dragged Jason across the Atlantic.
And
I dragged myself across the Atlantic.
I even came across the Atlantic, even though I live here.
Gabe came back across
the
the
Atlantic.
We'll get to that. Yeah. So we're in Stockholm for the spring gathering of the Flight Radio 24 Folk, where we get the entire company together. And we're actually one room over from what will be the karaoke later on. So watch out for that. That won't be part of the podcast, I promise you.
No, it's a very different vibe here in the spring. I've only been here in December previously, and May is very different. Well, there was sun. It was warm. It was nice. Now it's rainy.
You got one good day.
I got 1.5 good days.
There you go.
Yeah, but we should talk about the gathering and what we did. I don't think we should plan to do that, but we should.
We should.
Because it involved airplanes.
Yeah, exactly. It involved airplanes. It involved aviation, so we should talk about it. We went out to an airfield west of the city that had a surprisingly vast collection of general aviation aircraft, and we got to do a little flying. And that was a lot of fun. I think we had 68 people sign up to go up in a few groups of aircraft. We had a Cessna 172, a couple Diamond DA-40s. The Piper Cub wasn't flying. It was there.
It was there. It
we
was giving
used it as shade.
It was giving us
Yes.
shade. Yeah,
that's right. It was
Chipmunk.
a Piper. The Chipmunk, that was the highlight for...
And AN2 was present.
And AN2 was present, and no one's sure why it's there. That's the best part.
Origin story is very unclear, and apparently over the decades has become less and less clear as time goes on.
So at some point, someone knew why and how, but no longer.
There's airplanes at Arlanda like that there's not a clear origin story for.
This
That's
is
pretty
true.
cool
They
as
just
well.
showed up one day.
That DC-8's still there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's all these kind of myths around that, and it's super fun to speculate. I think there is an actual story that some people do know, but they prefer to leave it in this sort of like,
exactly.
It was an African king who ran out of money and was detained.
The AN2, I heard, was owned by the mafia, apparently. There's the Swedish mafia, and it just appeared there one day. Don't believe that story at all, but I like how it just takes on a life of its own, because it's never flying again, and they're never going to get rid of it, so it just lives there till the end of time.
They've bolted a trailer hitch to it so they can tow it around, but I don't think it's moved in years. The grass around it's pretty tall. But that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, which aircraft did you get to go
I was up in the Diamond, and now I'm definitely going back to working on my license after having flown that for a little bit. And now the bug is definitely back in me.
Well done.
Yeah, that's going to be an expensive journey. Flight School, sponsored by this podcast.
Frederick?
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure he'll go for it. It'll be fine. But Jason, what did you go up in?
I went up in the Cessna 172, a 48-year-old, but...
Oh, a young one.
A young, only 6,000 hours on it when they picked it up, so it's very young. I sat in the back. I didn't get a chance to fly because I graciously handed over the left seat to one of your colleagues because I've been up in planes before and he is not. But yeah, it was comfy back there. At one point, they turned around and were like, "Are you okay back there? You haven't said a peep. We haven't heard from you." I'm like, "I'm just looking out the window and enjoying myself. It's nice back here."
Looking down at the Viking Island.
Yeah, it's nice.
And then, Gabe, you were in the Diamond as well, I think?
I did the Diamond as well,
The other Diamond. Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
Was the registration of the
Oh, wow.
aircraft that you were in.
Oh, wow.
It is, oh, wow. Yeah. They had some good registrations there, I noticed. Several aircraft had they picked those.
Yeah, they were specific. Some of them we're not going to mention because this is a family-friendly podcast.
Yes.
But I was talking with the daughter of the owner of Oh Wow, and he wants to buy a new plane, but he doesn't want to get rid of the registration.
Yeah, it's a Finnish registration in Sweden, but he keeps re-registering it, I guess, and he refuses to re-register it in Sweden because he doesn't want to give up the reg, and who can blame him?
I mean...
Oh, wow.
Absolutely, yeah.
That was a lot of fun. Today we've spent more time under the gray skies because you have to temper your excitement and enjoyment.
This is what Sweden does to you, I can tell you. But the one thing you can count on is that there will be long daylight. That doesn't change in this time of year.
It'll just be very light gray.
Yeah, light gray through much of the night.
Yeah. There you go. So we've got Gabe here this week in between world travels to God knows where.
I'm not even sure.
Yeah, exactly. But your most recent trip was a few years in the making and rather interesting. So let's start there and talk about where you've been most recently.
Yeah, so I joined up with the first transatlantic flight of Global Airlines. First transatlantic with paying passengers anyway.
Or isn't it the first any flight with paying passengers on board? Did they have?
True.
I don't think they had any prior flights.
They had some prior flights with passengers technically, but they were invited and it was not paid and it was a bit of a surprise flight. They sort of did it without, we didn't really know who was invited and why. And so this was the first real flight with paying passengers.
Revenue, I'm air quoting, first revenue flight.
Yes. And it was done as a kind of unusual kind of approach to start off. They did it as this kind of charter flight. The first one was out of Glasgow, so I went up to Glasgow after finishing up another shoot in Zurich, which we can also talk about. But went up to Glasgow, caught this flight, and it turned out to have a lot of YouTubers on there, people that do these kind of videos, flight review videos. So it became a bit of a party of YouTube creation as well as this sort of first flight, which also had some people who had just sort of booked a holiday to New York for 4 days, which was funny because it was a lot of people that were invited, friends of the airline, friends of the founder, a bunch of YouTubers making videos, and then, just a handful of people who were like, oh yeah, let's go to New York. And what is this airplane again? And it was just kind of amazing.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And about 95 passengers was the count that I heard on an A380, which is obviously not that many, which is really fun because I was in economy and it was great because I had empty seats around me, not to mention the festive atmosphere of a brand new flight like that on a brand new airline that people have been talking and speculating and wondering because it can be difficult to figure out exactly what they're going for with this. But it was amazing to see it actually do a flight with people and go to New York in it, and it all went great.
So you put together a video, and that video is out now.
Yeah.
So we'll toss that link in the show notes for sure so that you can watch that video and kind of learn a bit more about the airline and what that was like on the first flight, people in suits doing push-ups at the bar and all.
That happened. One YouTuber wore a suit and did push-ups in the Sky Pub.
As one does.
Sure.
But, I mean, we've talked about Global Airlines. We talked about them when they first announced their intentions to create an all A380 airline, so multiple A380s, that would have 5 classes of service, including what they termed gamer class, which was going to basically be flight simulator rooms for a certain number of passengers. And that was kind of their introduction to the world.
Yes, when the pitch deck that Seth Miller got his hands on went public, it was laced with all sorts of, I'm just going to call it nonsense to keep it family friendly.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because it was nonsensical. And of course, none of that was going to happen. And in reality, none of that did happen.
So what did they do to the aircraft now that you've been on the plane and seen the changes that they made?
Give us a percentage of 0 to 100. How China Southern was that aircraft still?
Because that's where it came from.
Right. I mean, what you're getting there in terms of seats, hard product, everything is China Southern as it was. Business economy first. And what they've done is they've done some reupholstering. There's some logos here and there. There's some stickers. And then they've turned this sort of forward section just above the stairs into what they call a Sky Pub. And it says Sky Pub on it. It's basically just a place where they display some drinks. And in theory, you can go up there and have some drinks.
Because China Southern never had like an actual legit bar on their 380 like you might have seen on Emirates or even Korean where they had their duty-free shop, right? This was just like a galley space that they repurposed?
Right, yeah. They're using that forward section of the upper deck is a little bit of an awkward
Dead space.
Yeah, it's just difficult to figure out what to do with it. And so they're using it in this case to turn it into this Sky Pub. The only thing is that if you get too many people milling around in there, they have to tell you to go because there aren't enough oxygen masks. And it's quite a crowded space too. So it's a bit of a shame because actually it turned into it was nice to stand there and like there was some cabin crew handing out drinks and it was a good atmosphere, but very small. And then the founder, James, showed up and people were asking him questions, but then it just became too many people. And so these sort of very stressed high-fly cabin crew were coming up and saying, I'm so sorry, I know this is a special flight and everything, but you guys have to sit down.
We'll talk more about the cabin crew and who actually operated the flight in a little bit, I think. But the A380 is definitely a special aircraft because when you're on Emirates, for instance, it's not just a bar where they put a fixture there and they have a bunch of drinks. Like you said, Gabe, it's engineered to have passengers there. So there are seats with seat belts and there are extra oxygen masks and all that so they can accommodate those extra passengers. But I guess this aircraft doesn't really have that, so they ended up just shooing you away, which I guess is good from a safety point of view that they were actually doing that since this isn't an aircraft equipped for that kind of outfit, I guess.
Yeah, you could see that the high-fly people, they are serious people who operate aircraft, so they want to keep that happening in addition to, sort of making it a fun flight. I did hear that the cabin crew on board had been instructed to never say no to requests from passengers.
Well, that's a terrible idea. That's an absolutely terrible idea.
Now, this is hearsay. I don't have a direct source for this. But it was an interesting idea. But that meant in practice, like, I don't think they were getting so many crazy requests. It meant like you could get extra drinks in economy, and like if you missed the mealtime, you could ask for it when you wanted, that kind of thing. It wasn't anything crazy. But
can I fly the plane?
Can you finish the meal service? No. Well, I guess we could talk about that too, but I want to talk about the high fly bit, because it would be wrong of us to say that this was Global Airlines' first flight, because it was not. In my book, it was not Global Airlines' first flight. It was their aircraft being operated by Hi-Fly, which is, I guess this isn't a wet lease, or they just...
It's a damp lease.
It's a damp lease. There we go. We're talking about damp leases again. Someone else with a certificate of operation, they operated this flight for Global Airlines. Global Airlines, as far as we know, do they have trained flight crew for the 380? Because the aircraft's flown before. But again, was that a Hi-Fly crew or their own flight crew?
Yeah, so it's interesting because from what I could gather, speaking to some of the cabin crew, there were five cabin crew working on board who were hired directly by Global and are trained on the 380. And the rest are Hi-Fly. So I've never heard of such an arrangement before. I don't know how it works, but at least one of them that I spoke to said he's a Global Airlines employee. That's all he does. And he's waiting around to see what his next missions are after Manchester.
That's got to be
weird.
I mean, there's no announced...
If there are plans, if they have plans, they have not made them public.
Right. And so if he's saying he doesn't know, I mean, unless he was playing coy or something like that, but that's interesting to me. But they don't have any flight crew. It's all Hi-Fly flight crew, right?
Correct. Flight crew, Hi-Fly, 100%. Yes. And we had on board the famous Captain Mirpuri, who is also the chairman of the Hi-Fly group and flies all the cool flights and is type rated on everything.
Yeah, Hi-Fly will do pretty much anything.
Yeah, and he captained the A340 that I took down to Antarctica last year. So, yeah, pretty cool guy, actually.
I mean, it's not a bad job if you can get it.
No.
Yeah.
I fly all the biggest stuff to all the coolest places.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, we talked about a little bit about the backstory. We got some info on the first flight. Let's talk about what's next. Did they offer any ideas or inklings to what comes next?
Nothing. It's more kind of speculation, hearsay. They're talking about maybe they'll do a flight to Honolulu, or maybe they'll go to Bali, or these sort of things, but who knows who's actually said that or if it's in the plans at all. And when I asked James, the founder, about what's happening next, he said, look, right now we need to just be a little bit like, we've talked a lot and now it's not time to talk. Now it's time to go back and like plan the next steps. So I honestly got the sense that they don't even know. So
your video, especially, is, I think, the most fair of the chronicles of this particular flight specifically. And between Jason and I on the podcast, we've tried to keep an open mind, but also be realistic about their prospects, which I think everyone agrees aren't good. The economics of operating a single A380 or even multiple A380s.
Even Hi-Fly itself dabbled in this a little bit years ago,
right?
9H MIP and the other A380, and that quickly ended. Even Hi-Fly itself, with its own A380s that it took from Singapore, I think. Even they operated a few times on behalf of Norwegian, back when Norwegian was still doing long haul and needed aircraft, and it was such an operational disaster that they tossed it aside and said, even us as Hi-Fly, the specialists in doing the weird stuff with the weird airplanes, we don't want them anymore.
So Global's plan, unless they completely changed it, but their stated goal is to operate transatlantic A380 service with a premium product in all classes. Admirable goal, but the prospects, speaking realistically from all available human knowledge, are not good. That's been interpreted by some within the airline as a personal attack, which has led to some interesting exchanges with not only us, but others as well. Gabe, do you want to talk about that a little bit at all?
Yeah, I mean, to not go too deep into the weeds with it, but I think we have seen even in sort of public forums that we've seen that clearly James, the founder, seems to be very defensive about what he's doing there and all the criticisms, right? So there's been years of criticisms, say what you will about whether those are valid or not, and doubt, I guess. He would say hate, right? And so now a bunch of YouTubers came on and did a video about the first flight, And of course, there were teething problems. There were issues to figure out. Service delivery was really slow. It was sort of lunch service blended into the dinner service. In many ways, actually, I think economy was the best product on the first flight because it was a bit simpler and they were able to deliver it more or less. And it was premium. If that's what they're looking to offer and that's what they do offer, it was impressive. We got a little champagne to start off. We had a nice drinks menu. We got 2 full meals. I mean, this is a really nice product for a 6-hour flight in transatlantic, right? But we have seen that when people have criticized, including in these videos that were put out pretty quickly after the inaugural, the leadership at the airline has not been happy about it, has been very vocal about it, both in private messages and publicly. And it just doesn't seem like that's where the attention should be going. It should be going into sort of making this airline work, if that's your intention. But yeah, it's an unusual one in many respects. That's one way that it feels very unusual.
Yeah, that was well put. If you do something like this, that's clearly grabbing attention. You are seeking attention, and you have a bunch of influencers, YouTubers on board, you need to expect and just accept the hate or whatever comes your way. Because this didn't seem like hate, it was just here's what happened on board. Unless you're editorializing, which I know you did not, you just have to accept what happened because you're reporting on what happened on board. If the meal service was so long that they had to suspend it, that is a thing that happened on board, and reporting on it and talking about it and sharing that, it's not hate, it is simply this is what happened. And as the airline or whatever, they just have to own that and accept it, and fighting it as if to pretend that it didn't happen is only going to perpetuate that. It's the Streisand effect. It's just going to make it worse and worse. So I don't know. Maybe if they had come out with a plan of here's what we're going to do next, rather than just going, I don't know what we're doing next, maybe that would have diverted the attention a little bit. But if you truly came off that flight and have no idea what the next steps are for the airline, that's on them. So you're naturally going to focus on what went wrong.
I mean, I think some of the YouTubers, for example, did play up the negativity, the bad side, intentionally because they wanted to get more clicks.
This is why I don't watch YouTube reports on flights, or present company excluded to a degree. Like, I try not to watch these things because you can't tell what's fact or what's fiction. But in your case, like, I know you're not doing that.
This is also why our channel doesn't do a lot of these.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you have these people on board, you know who they are, you know what they do, you need to expect that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, yeah, I tried to go into it with an open mind, like you say, and I was saying to you earlier, it would be easy to go into that already kind of preloaded with snark in your head. You know, it's kind of like, oh, what's this airline? Let's make fun of it. And I think it was important not to do that and just to show things at face value. And I had quite a good experience, and I think overall, people on board had a good experience from what I could see, even in business class where the meal service was a bit more messed up.
If that's the worst thing that happened?
Exactly. Like some people got a cold steak. I mean, it's the first flight. They're figuring it out with this sort of mixed crew. I mean, to me, it seemed like a success. I thought they pulled it off nicely. Say what you will about the prospects for the business and all that. I felt that wasn't my place to really speculate on.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the podcast is for.
Exactly.
So let's talk about what the business is right now. It's, as we speak, as we're recording right now, they're operating their third revenue service with a flight from Manchester to JFK. The plane's going to then sit again for a few days before it returns back to Manchester. Yeah, the aircraft's sitting at JFK for 4 days. The figure that I've seen is roughly $50,000 a day to park an A380 at JFK.
50 a day, is that what you saw?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
It is one of the most expensive places in the world to park your airplane, which is why nobody in their right mind does it.
Yeah, so parking it for 4 days, even if they're getting a deal, it's still pretty expensive.
You have to be a head of state during UN week to get a deal to park at JFK.
And even that,
they don't do that
most of them
anymore.
head off to Stewart.
All of them now, because there were some illicit deals being made back in the day, and even the Port Authority had to crack down on that.
Ooh. Well, you know things are bad when the Port Authority is cracking down. So they're going to operate Manchester to JFK right now, and then JFK back to Manchester. And then after that, we don't know. There has been no announcement of what they're going to do next.
I'll definitely be setting a flight radar alert for the registration to see.
Yeah, to see where it heads.
Yeah.
So I guess most likely it'll head back to High Fly's base in Portugal, and then we'll see where they go from there.
Maybe they actually refurbish the aircraft and actually do the things they were going to do. Who knows? But reintroducing that thing with the original pretty beat up China Southern interior with an in-flight entertainment system that was dark because it was an old system when it was new because of all the way back when A380 delivery delays. So maybe they'll surprise everyone and put in gamer class and do all that stuff that they're not going to do.
I can say for sure that gamer class is not happening. I heard that from
that.
James. That's no longer a thing.
So we'll see. We'll see what happens, but surprise us.
So we'll wait and see. Gabe, while we've got you here, what else have you been up to?
So yeah, the shoot that I did just before the Global was a really nice one. We hooked up with Edelweiss, which has just taken recently its first A350, actually a used A350 it was originally LATAM, it was parked for a while. That's how they were able to get 350s before Swiss, kind of.
Ha!
Yeah.
They made a big deal about that when they took delivery because it was the first Swiss-registered A350.
That's right. They really like to point that out.
Same team, guys. It's all the same team.
Exactly. Except it's not. Yeah.
It's complicated.
It is very. Yeah. But that was nice. So we hooked up with them. We took a bit of time to convince them that we should do this. They agreed in the end that we'd do a flight deck video on their 350 and sort of do a little bit of stuff about the cabin on social media too. But we flew out to Pristina, Kosovo, I thought that was a very cool flight as these sort of European familiarization training flights go. Usually you get them to places like Palma, Ibiza, they've been sending it. That's kind of cool too, actually. But Pristina is a sort of wow. And they said it's somewhere actually Edelweiss flies a lot with the 320. That's a big market for them. And it's an interesting approach in there. It can be a little bit more challenging in bad weather. So I think they like it for that reason. It's also a nice sort of hour and 40-minute sector. So yeah, that was cool. We did just a turnaround. The only shame of it was not getting to check out Pristina at all, but that's how it goes sometimes. It was more interesting for the video to do a sort of day with the crew.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then there was a good bit of trivia that you quizzed me on earlier. And so I'm going to let you quiz Jason because I don't think he was there for that.
Did you hear me talking about it before, this flight level
I don't think
thing?
he was there.
No. Okay, so tell me if you've ever heard this, because this was new to me, and I've spent a lot of time in flight decks, including A350 flight decks, quite a few, which they often fly at these higher flight levels, right?
Yep.
So you get the 430, flight level 430, which is the ceiling for the 350. Often you're well above the other wide bodies in the area. And what was interesting about this one that I learned after asking the captain was, so for those who don't know, when you're flying eastbound, you fly at odd flight levels. And when you're flying westbound, to put it simply, you fly at even numbered flight levels. So in this case, we flew out east at 410, 41,000 feet. And then we came back west and we climbed up to 430, which is obviously an odd number. Yes. So I said, Captain, why are we flying at an odd number going west? Why is that okay? And he pointed out to me that RVSM airspace, which starts at 290, actually ends at 410. So RVSM is reduced vertical separation minimums. And that means that between those flight levels, you can fly at separations that are 1,000 feet. So, that you have the accuracy of technology, altimeters, everything that you can safely fly separated by 1,000 feet. But above 41,000 feet, it becomes a 2,000 foot separation minimum once again. And so as a result, the next flight level up from 410 is 430. There's no such thing as flight level 420. You cannot fly at that flight level anywhere. And for that reason, the even numbered flight levels actually swap to odd numbered flight levels when you get up there. So
love when a standard is suddenly not a standard.
It's amazing. And I had no idea about this. So if you were flying west at 40,000 feet, level 400, the next step up would be 430. And then there are higher ones than that, but there are very few aircraft that are flying at those levels.
Yeah, so, not much competition up there.
Right.
A couple of biz jets, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So that was quite fun to learn. And I even have a cool little chart that you can look at to see how they break down.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
What's next?
So we're going to do a couple of cool ones, a couple of good flight decks. So we're going to hook up with Discover Airlines out of Germany to go do their inaugural flight from Munich to Buda, northern Norway. And that's always cool because that part of Norway looks amazing. Any time of year, it's gorgeous. I've mostly flown up there when it's covered in ice and snow. I don't know how it'll be in sort of early June, but it should be really cool. And it's also interesting because a lot of airlines are adding these routes up to the far north. There's a lot of demand to go north away from the extreme heat of Southern Europe. So you sort of have this shift in sort of tourist appetites that airlines like Discover are looking to serve. So we'll do that, and we'll do some helicopters up there. And then actually the thing I'm most looking forward to is finally doing a Condor A330neo flight deck, and we'll do Mauritius. And I'll sort of join the crew for that layover. So I'll come back with the same crew, which is an excuse to be in Mauritius for 2.5 days as well. I've done a lot of Condor, but so far only single aisle and on the ground delivery flights, things like that. So it's always nice to work with Condor. They're a fun bunch.
Yeah, those have been some great videos. Was the one into Funchal was a lot of fun to watch.
Yes.
I mean, just the landing there from the flight deck is always something incredible.
It's amazing. And that one, I did a Lufthansa one where we had perfect weather coming in. And that was very disappointing, only for me, right? Everybody else was happy. Passengers happy. Pilots have an easier day. I'm the only one that's sad that it's not super windy.
Hoping for a go-around.
Exactly.
You got nothing.
And then we got onto the Condor one to Funchal. That was the second time I would do that. And they were saying, the minimums is pretty, like the visibility's marginal. Like we have to plan for a diversion to Tenerife. And I was like, great, let it get worse. In the end, it was sort of right at we just were able to see the runway. It has a higher minimums than many because of the challenging terrain conditions. And always really fascinating to see. And also to hear the ATC there, the controllers there are really, really good. They're really on top of their game because it's so sort of demanding, especially if you get these stacks of people holding and having to divert. So, yeah.
Can we recruit them to Philly Area C?
I was just about to shoehorn us into that transition.
So, let's do it.
All right. So let's talk about Newark.
Hey,
for hopefully the last time for a while.
You know what's bad? When even SNL is doing an entire 10-minute sketch just on Newark.
Ouch.
It's not good. You should watch it. It's good.
Yeah. I mean, we'll, I guess, put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
So, Jason, what's the news from Newark? I know we've got some changes.
Yes. So the FAA with the DOT has finally decided to do something about the catastrophic operational issues at Newark, though it's kind of, I'm not going to say too little too late, but it is really, really late since the current full runway closure at Newark ends on June 15th. As of May 20th, the FAA has put new flight by hour limitations in place at Newark, ratcheting it way down from, I think it was 38 flights per hour or something that was completely, 77 flights per hour was originally the targeted schedule limit. That has been ratcheted way down to, I think, what was it, the 38 figure? I don't have a laptop on me right now.
Yeah, 38, now it's down to 28.
38, it was 38, now it's 28 until the runway reopens on June 15th, I believe. And then for the summer season, everything is good, at least runway construction-wise. And then this picks up again September 1st, only on weekends. So it's not a 24/7 thing. It's only 11 p.m. Friday to I think Sunday morning. So basically a Saturday only thing. They'll have this in place again. So it's pretty much too little too late at this point because the damage is done.
So they ran out the clock.
The damage is done.
It doesn't matter anymore.
So they met with the airlines. The airlines have presumably come out with some sort of plan about reducing the number of flights, but I haven't seen any airline come out and say, here are our cancellations, here's our plan, here's what we're going to do. Presumably United will have to make the most cuts since it's their hub, but I have not seen anything from anyone about what they're going to do. So maybe they just cancel flights, spin the wheel of Newark flights and cancel whatever comes up. I don't know. But this is probably something they should have done from the beginning because we talked about this before. The FAA knew that there were going to be delays because of this runway construction. They knew their number was unrealistic and it hinged upon having the secondary runway, the crosswind runway, to hit that number, which for any number of reasons, there are a whole bunch of conditions, be it weather, wind, whatever, that limit the use of the crosswind runway. So more often than not, it's not being used, and it can't really be used for departures more often than not. So this was an inevitability, but here we are with less than a month left in the runway closure, and they're taking some action.
They'll have a lovely month to figure things out. Are you looking forward to your flight back to Newark later next week?
So we didn't talk about how we got out here, actually. So way back when, in February, when I booked this, I almost always fly SAS out of Newark, the nonstop, to Stockholm, Arlanda. But this time, for some reason, way back in February, before Newark had any hint of a meltdown more than it already was melting down, I decided to book a one-stop through Copenhagen out of JFK because SAS recently started serving JFK for reasons last year. Don't really know why, but I'm enjoying it. So I lucked out there. But actually, SAS's flight seems to operate pretty normally every day, even gets out faster than the JFK flight, which is an interesting twist because it's early enough in the departure evening. It's like a pre-6 p.m. flight. It's really when you get to 7, 8 o'clock where things fall apart, or in the morning hour when everyone's trying to get a 9 a.m. departure. And you can't all do that at the same time, it turns out. But yeah, I'm not thrilled about going to Newark, but it seems operationally, knock on whatever this table's made out of.
There's some wood somewhere.
But we crossed paths. We literally crossed paths in Copenhagen. I was on my connecting flight to Arlanda on a 320 CO as you were on the opposite taxiway, having just landed from Chicago. So literally crossed paths. That was nice.
That was good times.
And you just took the train into the office.
Today, yes.
Yes.
But I did fly from JFK 2 nights ago.
That's true.
Let's talk about Etihad. because as we recorded last week, we were talking about the orders coming out of the big Middle East airlines, basically timing those orders to Donald Trump's visit to the Middle East. And of course, we needed to add another order to that, which is Etihad's order, which happened on Thursday, of course, right after we stopped recording. And they're going to take 28 Boeing 777X and 787s.
And they gave a date, at least.
Oh, good.
Unlike the Qatar order, where they're just like, yeah, we're ordering planes, period.
Yeah.
Etihad said these aircraft are expected to join the fleet from 2028 and onwards. So pretty vague there. We don't know if it's the 78s they're taking or the 777X, but I mean, 777X 2028, I'm still not confident that that's a thing, maybe. But hey, at least there's some numbers there as Etihad continues to reinvent itself to be a stable and actually profitable airline, shockingly.
They had quite the quarter, a record profit this quarter. But they also announced a new route, and that was both a surprise to customers and the airport that they're going to serve.
That's a new one. Yeah, haven't heard that, but Etihad will serve Charlotte, North Carolina, beginning May 4th, 2026 on 787, 4X weekly, much to the surprise of Charlotte, which is interesting, apparently. An article out by Ted Reed on Forbes, apparently I believe he's local in Charlotte, or at least in North Carolina, I think, dug into it, and apparently the timeline went like this. Etihad called the airport on Wednesday. It's the first time Charlotte had ever heard from Etihad, which is interesting. On Thursday, Trump visited Abu Dhabi. On Friday morning, Etihad announced that it intends to fly the 787 between Abu Dhabi and Charlotte, and then tickets went on sale later that day on Friday. That is outstanding. Outstandingly fast work going from Wednesday, we've never heard from you before, to Friday, tickets are on sale. Because even typically for long planned announcements, you'll have a new route announced and then you'll hear nothing for a while. And then 4 months later, the tickets will go on sale. This was like, here's what we're doing. We're announcing, tickets on sale. That never happens.
Charlotte's going, great.
Yeah, okay.
Great.
This is their first flight.
This is fantastic.
First route to the Middle East or the region at all. Charlotte does not have a ton of international service, so this is a huge get for it. Not the only surprising long-haul route announced this week, was it?
Yeah, slightly less surprising, but I think equally exciting. Starlux is headed to Phoenix. So that'll be fun.
It's longest route in the entire network. So that's
You've flown Starlux, right?
I have a couple of times, I think.
Memories
kind of bleed together, but yeah, at least from Taipei to Osaka, I flew them once. Pretty sure I've flown them twice. But yeah, it's really nice. Those were all shorter flights, all intra-Asia, at least, on 330 Neos. But yeah, it's really great. As any new startup airline with brand new airplanes is probably going to be. It was very nice, but the service was outstanding. So I guess this makes sense in the context of they do a lot of semiconductor manufacturing in Taiwan, and Intel's looking to do that in the Southwest as well. They're building fabs there. So I guess it makes sense in that regard. And this is not a total surprise because Jeremy, friend of the podcast who's been on a number of times, they told him directly Phoenix is when he flew. Phoenix is one of the cities we're looking at. And there you go. Taiwan to Phoenix. Again, Phoenix, not an airport that gets a whole lot of intercontinental service.
Especially from Asia.
Yeah, not much at all. This is their only Asian
route,
you go. I believe. So, hey, they've got a lock on the market.
Yeah. Let's go back, not to the Middle East, but to Middle East Airlines for just a moment, because we finally know what Qatar Airways paid to take 25% of Virgin Australia. And it's a lot less than we thought it would be. It's only $500 million to take a 25% stake in Virgin Australia. And they say that it's mostly because Virgin Australia had negative net assets because of all the accumulated losses.
Like decade or so.
Especially if you think about what they're getting with that investment. I mean, the access to Australia.
Exactly.
It's such a good deal. And also that, $500 million in Qatar is like, what is that?
Yeah,
one
pocket change.
1747-8 intercontinental.
With some change
With
back.
some change back, yeah. So an interesting note there, they're still conducting what they say is a financial exercise to understand what intangible assets they can take out of their acquisition. So that'll be interesting to follow. This is not new news, but we do have a report from Spanish investigators now about a Lufthansa A321 flight that the captain left the flight deck to use the restroom. The first officer was alone on the flight deck and suffered a medical episode, which incapacitated him for a number of minutes, over 10 minutes. Within that time, the Spanish investigators report the first officer had a seizure. They're calling it a, quote, sudden and severe incapacitation, and that the seizure led to flight control manipulations during this period that the captain was locked out of the flight deck. So some of those were: one of the spoiler elevator computers was disconnected, deactivating 4 of the inboard spoilers, which was the 2 on either side or on either wing on the interior, which triggered warnings on the flight deck. The operating mode of the weather radar was changed, and an audio control panel a switch was activated.
None of these controls are near each other either, so
Right.
This was all over the place.
There was also a sudden increase of force in the right rudder pedal, enough to generate a stop rudder input warning from the flight computer, but it remained short of the threshold to disengage the autopilot. Very thankfully.
That was lucky.
The pedal input resulted in a 5-degree roll and a 2-degree heading change. The autopilot was able to compensate for both of those maneuvers. As they approached a sector boundary over Spain, air traffic controllers attempted to contact the crew. 3 times were unsuccessful. The captain attempted to come back into the cockpit. The first officer was not responding, requested reentry, was entering the code, wasn't working. They finally went to an emergency backup code, which involves a time delay lockout. But the first officer was able to allow the captain to re-enter the cockpit during that time. So 10 minutes elapsed between the first officer taking control of the aircraft, the captain leaving the flight deck, and the aircraft reestablishing contact and communication with air traffic control. Medical attention was provided by a doctor on board and the cabin crew to the first officer. They diverted to Madrid. The first officer says he remembered flying over Zaragoza and then coming to being attended by a doctor. So the inquiry found that he had a neurological condition that was undiagnosed that would have prevented him from securing a medical license to become a pilot, which, I mean, I guess good thing they found it now. Yes. Good thing nothing bad happened. But that leads me back to, this is a Lufthansa flight, which is the parent company, Lufthansa Group being the parent company of Germanwings. Germanwings being the airline that led to the policy of having 2 people in the flight deck at all times. However, the carrier had been instructed to assess the security risks associated with a single pilot being left alone in the cockpit. They had changed their procedures by requiring that 2 authorized people, so usually a cabin crew member, would come into the flight deck while one of the flight crew members was in the restroom or anything else. The airline subsequently found to their findings that did not, in fact, increase safety and quietly discontinued the policy.
Sort of anecdotally, I think is true across Europe. That was happening in quite a few airlines across Europe. Instituted this after the Germanwings crash. And then I've just sort of, from what I've seen, it doesn't seem like many are doing it anymore. But this is, I mean, yeah, like we were saying before, there may be very little risk to security, but it's not zero, right?
Right.
As evidenced by something like this.
And this might not be a security risk, but it's certainly a safety risk.
It's like saying the fire extinguisher out in the hallway doesn't really help us at all because we've not had a fire recently. Well, you'd be really happy about that fire extinguisher if this room burst into flames. So that's just terrible reasoning on their part.
And how much additional resources does it really take to have a cabin crew member sit in the cockpit while the captain or the first officer is out?
The most I can think is if they're doing service, they have to suspend it briefly, and that would lessen the sales of onboard beer and whatever. Like, that's the only thing I can think of that could possibly say, like, this isn't efficient. Like, yeah, it's just a thing you do because you've identified it as something you need to do to enhance safety on board. And when did this incident occur? Because this is not recent.
No, this is not recent. So this is a final report from Spanish investigators. The incident occurred February 17th, 2024.
Okay, so it's been over a year.
Yeah.
So I guess, and we don't really know when the two-person in cockpit rule at Lufthansa rolled back.
Right. So the German Wings crash was 2015.
Yeah, so it's been a long time.
So we're 10 years on from that now. But the recommendations from the Spanish investigators says that EASA should share this information with airlines so that they might be able to conduct a reevaluation of their security assessments. We'll see if that happens. Let's close out with some updated information on the 747 that's supposedly worth $400 million that the Qatari government supposedly wants to gift the U.S. As it turns out, the United States approached the Qatari government about this particular plane.
Oh, what a twist.
There are multiple reports now that this was born out of President Trump's frustration with the length of time it has taken to modify the two already slated to become Air Force One aircraft. Boeing said, here's a list of other airplanes that are out there. And they looked at the list and said, that one seems fine. Let's go ask the Qataris if we can have this plane. Then who knows what happened in the mind of the administration and in the minds of the Qataris. But we ended up last week talking about this gift that is certainly no gift.
No, it still doesn't make sense because even if Boeing said, here are all the 747-8I BBJs out there in the world, go get one from them. We talked about this last week. We'll still have to take those aircraft and refit them and refurbish them exactly the same way they're already doing with the two ex-Transaero aircraft. I mean, short of putting the seats and all the fit and finish, which I guess the Qatari aircraft already has, that there is a multitude of things that take many months, if not years, to do to those aircraft as well to operate, as I guess this would operate as Air Force One. You can't just acquire it and throw it into service. Well, I would hope not, but who knows these days?
None of this makes much sense when you scratch below the surface with the amount of work that it takes to turn any aircraft into suitable for the U.S.'s head of state transport. It just doesn't go very far. But we'll see what happens. The plane's in San Antonio. So I guess we'll see what happens.
It's so bizarre.
It is bizarre. But we will see if they, in fact, acquire it, if it gets a U.S. registration. We're going to keep an eye on that and if it flies, or if it just, hangs out there for a while and the Qataris are glad to be no longer parking it in Doha. Just to not have.
Who knows? They may not have any intentions of this being a bribe or any.
No, we just want to get rid of the plane.
Get it away from us. They've been
trying to sell it for 5 years. Maybe that's what this is.
It could be that easy.
This is we
finally found a fool.
Please,
foolish enough to take this airplane.
Yeah. We just want to be done with it. All right. Well, we should end this podcast because we have to go get ready for karaoke. Or something.
It's too early for
karaoke. It's never too early for karaoke.
Okay.
But that's it for episode 321. We'll work on coming back around to the Airbus numbers in 11 episodes or so. But until then, I am Ian Petchnick here with
Jason Rabinowitz
and
Gabe Leigh.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining.